Hi, this is activity for November 3rd, 2020 of the orderIT system. And I'm just going to go over the activity and just describe my interpretation. So as you can see on this side of the screen, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trades that occurred on November 3rd. There's a trade that's occurred up here that I'm just monitoring because I actually have stock that's still pending on that particular trade. But anyways, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trades occurred yesterday that were identified. 1, 2 were identified as short sells, and 1, 2, 3 have identified as buy operations. And just go into them and have a look. Uh, Again, this is just Yahoo Finance as being a way to look at the activity. And as you can see, this tripped at 101. So 12, 101, roughly around here is when it tripped. So it tripped roughly on that thing and came down again. But as you can see, it actually ended up the day above. So in general, it would have not been, unless you traded at this point in time, an aspects of getting a trade on that. So it technically was identified. It looked like it was a valid trade because you can see it was dropping for quite some period of time, but again, it recovered after this point in time. CF, again, another short sell indication, and again, this was roughly around 1 o'clock, 1:10. I can't see the time frame here. It would have been roughly around this area that it would probably around here, and it was a movement downwards. So overall, the day it was moving down up to this point, but as you can see, again, it recovered at the end of the day. This could also be because of the fact that the market itself was down a little bit in the morning, and it looked like it recovered a little bit at the end of the day. So this is kind of like maybe representing also what's going on, that it was identified as something that was moving downwards, but by the end of the day it did recover a bit. So those two trades were tripped, and they did recover at the end of the day. So you may have not made any money if you traded on those particular stocks. Okay, and the CLF is identified as a buying opportunity at roughly 2 o'clock. So you can see 2 o'clock, it looks like it was coming up, and it basically stayed stable. Again, it didn't increase after 2 o'clock, so it somewhat stabilized. So you could buy, and most likely you would have not lost any money extensively, but it did not rise. So that's an aspect of that stock movement wasn't completed after the actual trigger. Another one roughly around 2 o'clock. This one around 2:10. So it came in here and it did raise a bit, but as you can see, it did stabilize at the end of the day. And that could be just because of the fact of the trading activity for the indexes and that showed that it did come up, but we're not talking that it extensively shot up. So this may have been just an aspect of stabilization after its movement. But again, it was a positive movement upwards, so that's completely valid. And ETN, which identified at around 3 o'clock, which was roughly around this area. It did come in, trip around this area, so it was obviously on that. And as you can see, by the end of the day, it was actually up by the end of the day. So this stock, it ended above it. So it would have been a positive outcome if you traded on it in general. So that's a general review of the actual trade activity, but I'm just going to go through and review them based on observation analysis or technical analysis indicators. And this stock was a selling activity, and again, it was roughly around this area, so you can see the movement in that is is moving in a direction that seems to make it look like it was moving down. Again, everything was moving down at that point in time. But as you can see, because of the day, the market seemed to recover a bit at the end of the day, so things reverted, and so the stock itself also came back up. So as you can see, DI is a bit more complex. It really fluctuates quite a bit, but just the aspects of direction that it's moving in is what tripped it. And you can see that. And again, you can see that, yes, the stock was coming down, it tripped, and came down a little bit more, which may have been able to get it, before it started to move up. But again, it started to move up, so this would not have been a positive outcome at the end of the day. So that's the result of that. It still, though, identified the stock was moving downwards, and it looked like it was still valid moving downwards. And the next stock, which was also another selling stock, excuse me, and 1 o'clock, again, as you can see. Yes, okay, so it tripped over here, but as you can see, right after it tripped as a selling, it started shooting up afterwards. Even though its OBV movement was somewhat, stabilizing, basically saying it wasn't moving in any positive direction with volume. The MACD was indicating that its directional index did flip and then started to move more towards the positive, which is what we see in the actual stock. And again, the end result is it did trip, but then finalized the day as being more positive. And again, that could have been because of activity with respect to the markets themselves looking to come back in a positive fashion in the second part of the day. This stock, another short selling opportunity. As I mentioned, again, 110, as you can see, it was moving down, stabilized, moved down, but you can see right during the end of the day it looked like it was starting to recover. So again, recovering on all the different parts, it recovered and again recovered. So the short sells today were not 100%, and that goes in the aspects of really monitoring probably as much as anything else is actually the markets themselves to see which direction they're moving and that if a short sell should be done. Short sells are very, 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 tricky activity because you're somewhat going against standard, movement or standard practice. So it's a bit more complex to do a short sell. Even though the system can identify short sells, it's really basing it on the aspect that movement is indicating that something's occurring, a negative result of the stock, technically saying the stock's moving down, it's moving down strongly. It's just that it could be that something flipped it at some point in time and reversed its activity. But again, at the point where it was tripped, that wasn't obviously identifiable as a future activity because the system does not predict the future. Okay, so this is a buying opportunity, and it was identified 159. This one actually 2 o'clock. So I said this one seemed stable, but as you can see, the movement of it itself, it was picked up around 2 o'clock, and it still moved upwards. So its movement was upwards. Moving average, so was back and forth at the end of the day. So that kind of like it's hard to tell, if it was moving strongly. It was making movement volume-wise, but moving average was showing that it did flip back and forth, and it seemed that at the end of the day it started to revert back to being more of a slower movement. DI was showing positive movement, though. Directional index is somewhat saying it is moving, and it really is more of a trending kind of indicator. and it was showing that it did flip, and came in the aspects of coming down in the day and moving that way. So it's interesting because these guys up here kind of like give an explanation of what's going on with actually the actual movement of the trade activity itself. As you can see with the Bollinger Band, which is basically just a representation of stock activity, it indicated that something did occur at 2 o'clock, and did come up. So you can sit there and say that at roughly 2 o'clock it was moving up, but then stabilized. So in general, the stock itself did move positive, but then stabilized. As you can see that from the analysis, it did look like it kind of stabilized and sort of like almost, started to slow down a bit, which is probably a good explanation of why it actually was moving sideways at the end of the day. But again, it did trip before the sideways movement, so you could have still made money on this one. Go to the next one, and so let's make sure I'm on the right stock. This is a 110. Which is this stock here. And it did trip at 3 o'clock. So as you can see, movement was positive in the morning, then slowed down a bit, in the middle of the day, but then came back at the end of the day where it was moving positive again. So this stock in general for the full day was showing positive movement, which is somewhat the indication graphically wise of the stock itself. And the analysis is showing that yes, it was moving positive, even though yes, the MACD is up. The MACD was moving up practically all afternoon, and directional index again was showing positive directional movement. So again, MACD and NDI was showing that, and volume all showing positive movement at the end of the day. So this is a very positive outcome, and as you can see, the end result is that it moved up and basically ended the day at a positive point. So this technically was a good stock. So it looks like the selling activity itself, well, not extensive. They were all positive outcomes. The short selling activity, it looks like they would have not been a positive outcome if you waited to the end of the day. But in general, the system itself is identifying movement of a stock in a specific direction. If something is moving down, something did trip it to move in that direction, and it could be that it may take another day or so to actually for it to continue moving in that direction. So it's not that the short sellings were bad, just that because of the activity on the markets for the day, because at the end of the day, you can see that the markets themselves appear to start to recover. Dow looked like it basically came back at baseline, S&P baseline, Nasdaq, which is an important market because there's obviously a lot of technical or organizations, companies in the technical industry that are on the Nasdaq, and as you can see, it must have been an indication that those stocks were moving fairly consistently. But again, the end result is that it looks like the end of the day, the markets reverted and came from basically going down to going up, which kind of like would lean towards more of a positive point for buying stocks as opposed to selling stocks. But and again, the end is that even though short selling could have been done, and not have been a positive outcome by the end of the day, it can certainly still be a positive outcome in a day or so, which is basically just extending your day trading activity into multiple days. And I'm going to leave it at that. That's for today.